Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 10 of What You Need to Know About Boxing. I'm your host, Phil X Fights, who not only is a avid boxing fan, but again, as I've said on previous episodes, a budding basketball fan. Of course, you know I'm rocking the Golden State Warriors tee today. Hopefully we can tie that up 2-2, so maybe Steph Curry can come back. But all right, that's enough non-boxing talk. Let's get into it. A pretty all-around good weekend, I'd say, for boxing. Very eventful, very thorough. Of course, a pretty shallow offering coming up this next weekend here. Still going to break it down for everyone who's watching, but be forewarned, it won't necessarily knock your socks off if you don't know what's coming, but let's get into it. So first things first, a brief recap. I wanted to make a live reaction like I did with Anthony Kakachi stopping Lee Wood. If you want to see my thoughts on not only that fight, but Suleiman Sissoko versus Edgigis Kavaiaskis, otherwise known as Mean Machine, I'm going to have it linked somewhere around here, also down in the description. So I'm not going to cover that on the show today. I made a reaction in real time to that and my prediction. So go ahead, check that out there. But let's get into the first event I'm going to break down here, which was very controversial. In fact, we're not even sure of the results as they're going to play out. But as it stands right now, Emmanuel Navarrete defends his title against the, at least in my opinion, unheralded Charlie Suarez, winning by an 8th round technical decision after this punch right here, or this moment in the fight, was determined to be a clash of heads. Now, my prediction, as we see here, was Navarrete by KO in the 10th round. And just going off of the fight itself, I thought we were en route to that in the first 5 or so rounds, where Navarrete, I think, has actually improved in certain areas. So one of those areas would be straight punches. Navarrete used to only use those shoveling uppercuts, those hooks around the guard off weird angles. He would primarily start his offense with a hooked shot. And I really like that he had a lot more straight punches. He was delivering a crushing 1-2 right down the pipe that rocked Suarez several times. Credit to Suarez himself. He was able to find his own pockets of success. I don't think he was winning a lot of those rounds, but he certainly, I think, was looking for a big moment and potentially found his big moment, obviously, over here on the image I've got. So let's get into that, because I think really this encapsulates the whole fight, the whole controversy. What should we make of this? So on first glance, I thought that this was in part a head clash, or at least I wasn't so confident that this was caused by a punch, because I think you have a couple of factors. If you look here, yes, Suarez, he lands the shot, which looks to open up blood on that brow ridge of Navarrete, but there is also a serious consideration for, was that the glove itself, like either the tape of the glove or the stitching, was that the moment that opened up the cut? I think it's an interesting dilemma of how much time should they give to make a definitive ruling, because the referee, who was standing within eye shot, determined that that was a head clash in real time. Then they went to instant replay to see if there's a case for overturning it. It took so long, they had to go through so many camera angles to find a definitive overruling, because again, I think that as a good rule of thumb, of course, everyone wants to have all standards go out the window the second anything controversial happens. But I think for the health of the sport, that the ruling in real time should stand unless there is official and conclusive evidence to the contrary that can be brought up within a reasonable time difference. Because if you have to stay there, because we're still getting new information. Here's my case, right? My case is you have to be able to deliver an official result at the end of the fight. We can't have it where the fight has no result. And here we are now, Monday afternoon at the time of recording this, still trying to pick what kind of result we want from the fight. You have to have an official ruling in the moment. Now, that may end up having it where there was something missed, right? So in this case, we ruled that this was a head clash or at least non-punch determinative, and therefore we're going to the scorecards. But that still doesn't, at least in my view, because here's the other part of it. If you're not privy, there is an entire, I don't even know what you want to call it, an entire organization of people on the internet right now saying that this was, an officiating nightmare, one of the worst officiating moments we've ever seen, all of that. No, this is a really hard call. Like, you have to be fair, guys. Be really fair. If we're having to go through 16 camera or 14 camera angles, whatever the official number was, to find, okay, what actually caused this, that many camera angles, we're expecting the official in real time to have been able to make the proper ruling for, how this fight played out. I don't tend to think that's very reasonable, if I'm being quite honest. I mean, this fight as well was a sloppy fight. This was not a fight where I came away from it, oh yeah, 2 world title caliber fighters. No, absolutely not. So you already have a sloppy fight that's hard to judge what's really landing, if I'm being quite honest, throughout the fight. Then it comes down to this moment where, was the punch the reason that the cut was caused, or as Navarrete was bending his head down, Suarez was leaning over. It looks like maybe Suarez's chin connected on Navarrete. Then it looked like maybe their heads had clashed. Again, this is not a easy thing to determine. So that's all in all to say, I don't mind that there's a controversy around this, in the sense of, I don't think this was obvious. Now, for a counterpoint, Gervonta Davis, when he fought Lamont Roach, that is clear. It's clear. You don't need 14 camera angles. The man took a knee in the middle of a fight. He was hit with a jab. Yes, you want to argue, oh, it didn't rock him, oh, it didn't hurt. It doesn't matter. If a punch connects and you take a knee, there are no timeouts in boxing. It's obvious what the referee should do there. Of course you call a knockdown. There's no other possible determination there. Whereas this, there's all these camera angles. I'm not going to keep saying it over and over to be repetitive, but still, So that's my honest take on it. And I don't know if that's not alarmist enough, or if I really should be getting out the pitchforks. But look, we'll see. As of right now, the California State Athletic Commission is making an official ruling to see if this becomes a no contest. The WBO, Gustavo Oliveri, is maintaining that they will wait for that official ruling before determining what happens with Navarrete's world title. And I think the best course of action, because I like to get into what fight is next, make the rematch, right? I mean, there's no real clear-cut next WBO contender. I mean, on this card, we saw the return of, oh goodness, what's his name? I mean, his performance was so nondescript, I'm having trouble remembering it. What was... He's the guy that had a very disputed decision with Abraham Nova in his last bout. Hold on, I'll get it momentarily here. Wow, yeah, his performance was so poor, I can't even be bothered to remember his name. Andres Cortez, yeah. So maybe they do the Cortez fight next. Just do the rematch. Also, I saw Carl Moretti of Top Rank say that the rematch is going to come. So good on them. I don't think it's necessarily a big fight, but it's certainly more interesting than the first time that this fight was happening. And I guess I do have to give Charlie Suarez more credit and more of a chance to win the fight this time than I did first, because I thought this was going to be a routine title defense for Navarrete on the borderline of a destruction. So, yeah. But I don't want to spend too much more time on that. I think I've pretty much got it covered here. Let's see the rematch. I don't mind that there was controversy. If this becomes a no contest, I also don't mind that, by the way. I would mind if they make this a win, because, again, it's not so much about case by case. For me, it's morally about principle. I don't like that. I don't want them to overturn a result from a win from one fighter to a win for another, even if there is the evidence to provide otherwise. You couldn't get that evidence in a timely fashion. You have to move on. So I wouldn't mind if this is a no contest. I think giving this to Charlie Suarez by actually stopped by a cut, I'm just not so sure about that. Maybe I can hear a compelling case to the contrary, but it's just not what I tend to lean on there. All right, co-main event. I went by Raymond Morataya to beat Zoar Abdullayev by unanimous decision, and that's exactly what happened. Look, Zoar Abdullayev has been on a good win streak. I did point that out, but he's a one-armed fighter. It's kind of incredible. All he does is stick out the jab, 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 jab. And if you literally have no meaningful offense beyond a jab, sometimes you put 3 or 4 punches together, you're not going to win at this level. Now, that's pretty much all I have to say about him, because really, what else am I supposed to say? He didn't let his hands go. When he did let his hands go, he had success. So, that's his whole career. But for Raymond Morataya, I've had my moments where I've been high on him. I've had my moments where I've come down. This performance was precisely what I thought Raymond Morataya would do, which means I'm not going to be that high on him. Look, I think if you're going to establish yourself as a guy that I could see upsetting Keyshawn Davis or finding a route to victory against Shakur Stevenson, I needed to see a dominant performance here against Zoar Abdullayev. I did. Now, I know that technically this was dominant, right? 9-3, however you had it. But I would have needed to see a stoppage before I'm picking Keyshawn Davis to not beat you, if I'm being quite honest. So let's see. I don't foresee a unification bout being next. I mean, top rank and unifications are like oil and water. It's so. What was the last top rank unification? Can we talk about this for a second? Hold on. Let me adjust the mic here. What was the last time Top Rank put on a meaningful unification between two fighters that are in their state? So, okay, Oscar Valdez, Shakur Stevenson. Sure, but at the same time, they thought Shakur Stevenson was going to be their next superstar. They were putting everything behind him, and at that point, Oscar Valdez was in his 30s and never really was that big of a superstar, so they didn't mind him losing. Beyond that, let's see. You had Artur Beterbiev versus Joe Smith Jr., but again, Joe Smith Jr. was on borrowed time. He arguably didn't even really win the title against Maxim Vlasov, right? So they wanted Beterbiev to be a 3-belt unified champion. I'm trying to think, what is the other... I mean, they've done female unified fights, like the Michaela Meyer fight. They did Sinisa Estrada, Undisputed. I'm really trying to think. Let me go through the divisions here. So heavyweight, I mean, they've co-promoted, but it's not like a big top-ranked guy. Then you have cruiserweight. No, they're completely out of the picture. Like heavyweight, like I said, Joe Smith Jr., Artur. And then, of course, Artur versus Bivol. But again, that's Saudi money. That's not really what I'm talking about here. 168, they're out of the picture. 160, they did Janibek versus Gualtieri, but Gualtieri wasn't one of their guys, so that's not really a unification done by Top Rank. You go down further, 154, they're out of the picture. They got Xander Zayas. Then you go 147. Crawford never unified his world title. Brian Norman Jr. doesn't look like he's unifying with Boots anytime soon. We'll see if that changes, but I doubt it. 140, of course, they had the whole Josh Taylor, Jose Ramirez. So, but how far ago do we have to, go down the line for that? That's still quite a while. Yeah, so you got that. 135. 135, they're not unifying, right? I mean, it was like Loma Tiafimo, I guess. But again, I guess that was aggressive matchmaking in a sense. But at the same time, it was either, is Teofimo Lopez going to become a star or is he not? And then you go down further. 126, where's the unifications there, right? I mean, you've got, they're 126 champions, Angelo Leo, all that. And then you go further down on the 122, they're not really even involved in anything beyond that. So, yeah, brief little talking point about Top Rank and their unification. So I don't foresee Raymond Morataya versus Keyshawn Davis next. But it'd be nice, hey, it would be nice, but I just don't see it. let's move on here. This undercard was pretty decent. Andres Cortez had a really ho-hum performance. I was not particularly impressed about that. I thought that their new female signing, Perla Bazaldua, I appreciated what she put forward. Giovanni Santillan back in the mix in a very, honestly poor fight for his profile. There was a time where Giovanni Santillan was considered the next guy at welterweight. Bud Crawford doesn't want to fight him and all this stuff. I heard these things. I'm not making this up, but he's kind of in no man's land. And also, Sebastian Hernandez Reyes versus Azat Havanesian, otherwise known as Crazy A. Kudos. That was a phenomenal fight. The fact that was the first fight on the night was criminal. I mean, Crazy A has given us some absolutely amazing performances. This was just another one, and, credit to Sebastian Reyes because that was a really good performance. Great fight by both men. Had to give that a shout. But let's move on here to something I'm excited about. Oops. That's right. It's back. It's been a minute, but we got Who's That Fighter, because this man, at just, I believe, 22 years of age, impressed me remarkably so. So, I'll give you a second. Who do you think it is? This is a fighter that was on the ProBox TV card over the weekend. This is none other than a man that I need you all to remember his name, Durrell Blast Valsaint. Man, oh man, did this kid impress me. Now look, did he impress me from the standpoint of he had the perfect performance? It was, he didn't get hit? No, absolutely not. But this man on his left, that is Rodolfo Orozco, who is most well known for fighting Conor Benn. Yeah, remember that guy? No, but in all seriousness, Orozco gave Conor Benn a good fight, and he gave Durrell Valsaint a good fight. The difference was Valsaint, in around the 7th to 8th round, began to just dig to the body, so much so that he broke according to what I heard, several ribs of Orozco, forcing him to retire on his stool. He could not continue. Valsaint broke this man's ribs. That's some real hard stuff. And by the way, I also found out post-victory, he did this all with one hand. He broke one of his hands, I think, in the second round. And he was still able to... Orozco is so tough. I've seen other of his fights. I remember when I was studying for the Conor Benn fight. If nothing else, this guy is tough and game. And Valsaint beat the fight out of him. Really good stuff. You gotta love just I believe, 22-year-old. I mean, I'll double check just for the sake of... giving him the proper respect here. But let's see here. This man... Oh, okay. 24 years old. But still, very young, very impressive. Like what I saw. Good stuff, Valsaint. And let's get to the rest of that ProBox TV card. So, I went with Erickson Lubin by 9th round stoppage. Took him a little bit longer to get going than, obviously, what I predicted. But still, knockout in the 11th round. I just got to say, look, I can talk about the fight. The fight was cagey. It was... Lubin had a very slow pace to start the fight. I think he wanted to see what Holmes really had to offer him. But this was terrible matchmaking from the get-go. I have no idea. Look, I'm not privy to what Dimitri Salito wants or what kind of conversations were going on. But in the same vein here, this was terrible matchmaking. I've seen Argel Holmes, last 7 or 8 fights. All of his fights on the Dimitri Salita fight nights. I've seen them all. He's had promise. He's had talent. But this was not the point where you throw him in against Erickson Lubin. I had posited on my prediction video that maybe there's something we're missing. Maybe Argel Holmes has some sort of stylistic matchup that can best Lubin I'm not privy to. But no, Lubin gets a pretty textbook stoppage win here. I'd picked him to win by stoppage. On his resume, he tends to win most of his fights by stoppage unless he's in with a very tough competitor. And this was just terrible matchmaking, in my opinion. However, Lubin now holds the IBF interim world title. I believe at the very least, he won an IBF world title mandatory position now, where it's him versus Bakhram Murtazaliyev. He, in the interview, said that Bakhram, there's nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to run, he's coming. So let's see that fight next. I'm not sure if Keith Thurman is going to get in the way of that. Potentially that's on the table, but I don't know if that's necessarily what Keith Thurman wants. I think Thurman still sort of building back in this point in his career, still trying to get back on the racehorse. But now that Tim Tszyu is fighting Sebastian Fundora in a rematch, I don't know. But Lubin Murtazaliyev, really good fight. I'd love to see that as a proper either co-main event on an Amazon Prime fight night or potentially the third bout on a PBC pay-per-view. Either way, let's get that fight sometime, let's say, what is it, May? September, October. Let's get that fight made. I'm looking forward to it. Should be a good fight. Lubin is really underrated, in my opinion. And, he was stopped by Fundora. I think Fundora's underrated, which is crazy to say because he's a unified champion. But, yeah, good stuff all around. Good undercard here. I really wanted to highlight Valsaint, but you can go back. The whole card's free on YouTube. It was a good watch, generally speaking. Alrighty, let's move on here to the final fight card. So first things first, Mark, if you're watching this video, thank you for pointing out something I had said that is not factually accurate. If you ever hear me say it, by the way, I love criticism. I love being pointed out when I am wrong. It is my goal to provide the best possible information I can to people who watch this show. So if I do say something that is wrong, please, I implore you, let me know of it. Obviously, if it's an opinion thing, if you say, like I said, I think Lubin's underrated, and you go, no, he's overrated, well, there's not much I can do there. But saying something factually incorrect, please let me know. So I got to give a shout out to Mark. He said, or he had pointed out, I said that the winner of this fight could fight Bam for undisputed, but I had forgot that Fernando Martinez was stripped of his IBF title. I think I was confusing a couple of things where Bam was holding the IBF title against Sonny Edwards, but then he moved up in weight from 112 to 115, and then a combination of that plus just, forgetting a few things here. And of course, the people that are fighting for that IBF title are so undescript, right? Is that Yabuki? Hold on. Masamichi. Unless Masamichi Yabuki is the champion in that division. He is the IBF. No, okay, he's the flyweight champion, right? So that's 112. And then 115, I think, is Willebaldo versus the other one. Let's just double check here. Oh, man. Sometimes this stuff is hard to keep track of. I'm pretty confident that I'm going to move on. I don't want to spend too much time on it. But look, that was incorrect. But let's get into the fight here. I had picked, of course, it shows both things. Great. Okay. I had picked Fernando Martinez to win by unanimous decision, even though Kazuto Ioka is the rematch king, but every king must fall eventually, whether it be by age or by conquest. And there's just something about this matchup where Fernando Martinez just has the ability to win these fights against Kazuto Ioka. Now, going back, I wasn't able to watch this live, but I mean, kind of like the first fight, Ioka probably deserved to win, just like so many other fights in his career, but just the eye-catching nature of what Fernando Martinez does, even in rounds where I don't think he's winning, he just does these things that the judges prefer. And it sucks to say because arguably Ioka should be 2-0 against Martinez, and instead he's 0-2. But part of making good predictions is not only factoring in how the fighters match up skill for skill, but it's also how do they compare? We've seen this before. We saw, this is going back a while now, but you could even say Oscar de la Hoya, right? When he fought, oh my goodness, I'm having an off day today. Oscar de la Hoya, when he fought. Also, I think my internet is, I don't know. There's kind of crazy stuff going on. Where is he here? Shane Mosley, right? Okay, here we go. When Oscar de la Hoya fought Shane Mosley, you could argue that he won and then he lost. And then you could argue that he won and then he lost. It was one of those things where sometimes a guy just has your number ever so slightly. And I think that's really what you saw here. Now, I clipped this, so what's this part? This is round 10. The fight was hanging in the balance. Ioka lands a picture-perfect left hook on Fernando Martinez, drops him, I'd say, very significantly. Martinez, to his credit, got up, but you can't be this open, left or right hand down by your waist against Bam Rodriguez, or you're going to be put out cold. So, had to point that out. The defensive lapses of Fernando Martinez, yeah, especially late into a fight. I know you're tired, I know, but no excuses. Also, one of the Tsutsumi brothers, so we saw the one brother win in Times Square. Yesterday, Hayato Tsutsumi won by knockout in the third round, so I was one round short of a perfect card prediction, but that's all right. He's one of the best prospects in the world, taking out Jaime Arboleda. Good stuff there. All right. Let's briefly get into some predictions for the weekend. It's a very, like I said, shallow weekend of boxing, but we break it all down nonetheless. You know, we like our boxing weekends like we like other, we like all kinds of boxing weekends. Let's get into it here. Johnny Fisher versus Dave Allen, the rematch in the Copper Box Arena, or as some Brits like to say, the Copper Bosh. Yeah, I had to say it one time, If you've ever seen this guy's dad, Big John, who just orders a absurd amount of Chinese food and is eating himself into a diabetic, cholesterol-ridden hellscape, it's quite the thing to observe there, but yep, the rematch is happening. If you didn't see the first fight, Johnny Fisher was, I'd call it outboxing, but it was just out-throwing Dave Allen for the first 4 rounds or so. Then Allen hit him with a shot from the gods, rocked Fisher all over the place. He lost his legs, and then Allen beat him up for the rest of the fight. Should have been an Allen win pretty clearly, but I guess even over in Riyadh, you can get an A-side decision to go your way. Johnny Fisher wins, I believe, unanimously or some nonsense like that, but it should have in all likelihood gone to Dave Allen. So that's it, right? Dave Allen, he's going to win the rematch, set the right wrong. Sadly, I'm going with Johnny Fisher to win a decision. Now, I know, I don't necessarily want this result, right? There's always something good about rooting for the underdog, rooting for the guy that was wronged. The problem is Dave Allen is just so inconsistent throughout his career. Maybe the first fight between Fisher and Allen was an indicative sign that things are going to go good and Allen's really putting it all together at this point in his career. The problem is I just can't trust him. I think he's quite inconsistent. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I do. But I think Johnny Fisher, he's the bigger man. He's got a lot to learn. He is young. I don't necessarily rate him whatsoever as a heavyweight prospect. I think for the longest time, he's just been a glorified ticket seller, if I'm being as brutally and uncomfortably honest as I possibly can be. I think out of all of the amazing British heavyweight contenders and prospects, Moises Italna, Fabio Wardley, even a guy like, oh my goodness, the British champion, who had all of them. They're all quite good, but I think Fisher, I think he's the runt of the litter, so to speak, but I do think he'll get the job done, begrudgingly so. Also on this card, we've got a rematch between Kieran Conway, or not rematch, what am I saying? Kieran Conway, he's fighting for the British title against a very nondescript opponent. I think he'll win. I think Kieran Conway is one of the better middleweights that is not currently at the world title level, but I've enjoyed some of his performances in the past. I expect him to get it done. Also, this isn't necessarily a prediction, but, well, it is a prediction, KO, right? But Taylor Bevan, all right, I watch hundreds of British prospects week in, week out. I like what I see out of this kid. Now, it could be another, smoke and mirrors, right? But I like this guy's hustle. I like how he puts his punches together. I think Taylor Bevan could be an actual one to watch. I do. I'm putting my reputation a little bit on the line here. Maybe he goes out, has a stinker. Maybe he doesn't amount to really anything. But I like what I've seen out of this kid. I do. I expect him to have another highlight reel KO. I think they're developing him nicely. So I had to give him a shout out. Hopefully he impresses. All right, finally here. Again, like I said, shorter episode. But Serhii Bohachuk, he's back on UFC Fight Pass. Another Tom Loeffler Promotions, 360 Promotions show against the Professor, Mikhail Fox. Look, I like Mikhail Fox. I do. Impressive record, I think 24-4 and 1, I think. Of course, you can go back to that fight against Gabriel Marestre. That was nothing short of a horrific robbery. He's had good performances throughout his career. 2 comeback fights since that loss to Edgis Kavaiaskis. I think you have to back Serhii Bohachuk here to win. His performance against Virgil Ortiz stands as one of the most impressive feats of his career, or feat of anyone at 154 pounds. And here's the thing. Mike, he's never been stopped before, right? 4 losses, never been stopped. And in most of his losses, you could argue they should have gone his way. But if I'm going to pick Bohachuk, and I will, the man's got 25 wins, I believe, 24 by knockout. And if that's the case, I'm going to have to pick him to win by knockout, but I'm going to say late. I think this is a scheduled 10-rounder, so I'm going to go by 8th round stoppage. I don't think it'll be a highlight reel. I think Fox will be tough. Maybe it'll be a case where he's standing on his feet, but I'm going to pick Bohachuk, and I'm going to pick him to win inside the distance, as is typical for his career. Also on this card, the return of Japanese champion Mizuki Hiruta. I think she'll win by unanimous decision. Her opponent looked into her a little bit. I never pretend to know more than what I do. Not exactly privy to her opponent. I haven't seen any of her fights, but her rating on BoxRec seems to be pretty high. That algorithm seems to actually assess fighters pretty accurately. So I think she'll be in for a tough night's work. I don't foresee some sort of knockout, but I think Hiruta will get her hand raised. I like what I saw in her last fight over there in the Commerce Casino. I think she's quite good. And then finally on this card, the last fight of note, one of Tom Loeffler's best prospects over there in the featherweight division, that being Omar Trinidad. He's taking on arguably his worst opponent in his last few fights or so. You know, he's been taking on some fringe world level guys. His opponent that he's fighting this upcoming weekend is not close to that level whatsoever. I expect him to have a short night at the office. So, yep, I think that's about everything. Yep, here's the thumbnail. Look at me. Here we are. So that was episode 10. Hope you enjoyed it. A little bit shorter, a little bit easier to digest. Again, not so much of a great weekend to look forward to, but hey, it's boxing. I'll watch it. And if we find anything new about Emmanuel Navarrete, if that fight is overturned to a no contest, I'll try to see if I do something about that. And again, give me a like, a follow, a share. Anything helps. And I'll see you next week. So hopefully we got some good boxing. And also, happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. I know this is coming out a day later, but, you know, tell the women in your life, all the mothers, that you love them and how much they mean to you, because it's important to do so. So, all right, on a wholesome note, I will see you next time. Bye.